Welcome back to the workshop. My name's Jack, this is Everyman Builds, and this is an Ooznest Workbee Z1 Plus CNC router. If you've been following along up until this point, you should have your X gantry, X carriage and Y plates all assembled, and the next step is the base assembly. So we're going to move this out of the way, make some space, and do that. So the first part of this is to take 16 L brackets with 64 8mm M5 button head bolts and 64 T-nuts. Put the flat side of the T-nut against the L bracket and very, very lightly join all the pieces together. You need to do that 4 times per bracket, 16 brackets. I'll see you in a little while. So with all of the 16 assembled, there is a note that here you may be able to see some of the bolts are slightly closer to the corner. These are the ones that we need to use going into extrusion C. So we slide these in, one at each end first, and tighten that. And then we do that for the other end down there, and then the other side, so we have 4 per extrusion. And when it says tighten, you want them tight enough that they're not going to fall out, but loose enough that you can move them, because we do need to line them up at the end here once we put the extrusion A on to make the base. So tighten them so they don't fall out, but loose enough that you can still move them. So we've got all of the brackets attached to the ends of the C extrusions. We now take the A extrusions, slide it along all of the C's. Make sure that the first C and the last C are 80mm in from the end, which is about there somewhere, and then evenly space out these two here. So we should end up with 3 evenly spaced gaps in the middle, 80mm at each end, and do that front and back. What I would suggest is the C extrusions on each side are left loose-ish until you've got both done. Once they're both assembled, flip it around if you can, so you can access both sides, and then tighten it down. What you can do as well, I've got 2 squares, they are both square. This one I will just reset and make sure it is square, but I know that this one's square. So we'll use that to make sure that when this is connected here, that it is actually square to the extrusion on both sides. I will also measure corner to corner and make sure that that distance is the same as well. It's very important that this is as square as it can be, and it's very important that it's as flat as it can be. I'll show you here. Let's just move this camera. We've got all the way along the table bed here is perfectly flat, and there's no wobble. I mean, there's a tiny bit of wobble, but it's as flat as it's going to get. You may need to loosen some of the bolts, depending on how much you've tightened them. You may need to loosen them a tiny bit just to get them into extrusion A. What I would suggest as well is doing the opposite of what I've done here. I've started all the way at one end, and I'm going to push this C extrusion all the way through. What I should have done is 2 from one end, 2 from the other end, and meet them kind of in the middle. And then each one travels less distance. And it should be a tiny bit easier to get together as well, because you haven't got to worry about sliding everything through the whole of the channel. But lesson learned, I'll do that on the other side. And if I buy another Ooznest in future, I'll do that on that assembly. But for this one, not so. 50 and a half, 26 and a half, 34, 84, 85, 119, roughly 40 between each one. So we do 40, 40. So measuring these at the moment, I've got 340, 585 and 265. And in my head, I've added them all up. And if I do 40 or 400 and 400, I should have just under 400 here in the middle. So I'm going to make 400 distance between there and there, 400 distance between there and there, and then leave the middle as it is. Whoops. I need to fix this side first. So that is 400 there. Tighten this. That is 400 there. And then this one in the middle is 375. So I could move these 8mm ish outwards. That would make this middle one 391 and these 394. I'm not going to worry about it that much. 400, 400, 375 is perfectly fine for me. So I'm going to flip this around sideways so I can access the side, because behind me there's a big wall. Tighten this down. I'm going to use my square here just to make sure everything's square. So that one's not, but it will be once I've measured the other side. That's square there. Make sure all of these are square. Tighten it all down, measure the corners, and then we'll be back. So this is now assembled as a base. I've made sure everything is square, both sides, and from diagonal point to point is 2118mm in both directions. So I'm going to say it's pretty square. Everything is square here. These are all tightened down. I've got 400, 400, 375, 400, 375, 400. And again, the diagonals are the same in both directions. So I'm going to say we're good.